Welcome to Climate Quest. Our mission is to inspire the next generation of climate founders by showcasing the real world journeys of young entrepreneurs and investors in the climate space. We are on a journey to demystify climate tech and tackle the blockers young entrepreneurs are facing in building or starting new companies.
Today, we're talking to Lisa Oberaigner. She's co founder and CEO at Emidat, a climate startup in the construction sector. Lisa is originally from Austria and came to Germany to study at the Technical University of Munich, where she also completed the prestigious entrepreneurship program CDTM, the Center for Digital Technology and Management. She wrote her master thesis at MIT here in Cambridge in 2022 and founded the startup Emidat right afterwards. Emidat enables climate positive construction by offering a software for AI power generation and distribution of EPDs, environmental product declarations, measuring and improving environmental performance of building materials in a faster and cheaper way. Emidat just raised a 4 million seed round last summer and is now employing around 15 with some of the world's biggest construction manufacturers as their customers. That sounds really awesome and really excited to have Lisa here. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Great. Lisa, you can start off by briefly introducing yourself and sharing what inspired you to start working in climate.
Yeah, you already did a great job in starting that out. So as you said, came from Austria, studied management and computer science, and have been in the climate space since roughly 2018. I started very simply doing student projects in all kind of industries, also in food. Did a, for example, blockchain project with SAP on how to track materials along supply chains and their environmental impact. And saw it from different angles, and first got really excited about it when I was abroad, actually, because I had been excited about startups before, but this impact perspective only came when I started to realize, wow, here in Germany, we really have all the opportunities and we should use it not to found the next energy drink startup, but do something that has a positive impact in the world. And then climate was just I think it's also very locally influenced because in Europe, this is just such a big topic at the moment. I think in other continents, I would maybe start an education startup or whatever. So it was really impact driven at first. Climate just was a topic where I felt like I can have a really big impact and a big lever in the world. Then we chose the industry also based on where we can have the largest lever when it comes to climate change.
Awesome. Thank you. Before we go further into your vision for Emidat and the impact of the construction sector, I wanted to ask you what your definition of climate tech is.
Good question. My definition is climate is not a vertical. It's something that goes through all industries. So there is not really one industry that climate tech is focusing on. Instead, every industry needs to change significantly. And for me, climate tech is just anything that helps increase or speed up this change. So this could be software, could be hardware, and could be any industry. So climate tech is actually a really, really broad term.
Great. We are hearing very different definitions of climate tech, but I feel like yours covers a lot and is aligned with a lot of people's understanding. You already mentioned the construction sector and that you identify this as a large lever. Can you say a bit more about how you narrowed down where you want to focus on and how you landed on the construction sector?
Yeah, so I started out super broadly. I knew I wanted to found in the climate space. And as I just said, this could have been anything really. And then for me, it was a bit of a both top down and bottom up process. So I started out with co-founder search, found someone who was also really excited about climate tech and similarly long in this, had looked at the space from different angles. Then we together decided that we wanted to focus on construction. One, because it is a really, really big impact factor. If you look at buildings and construction, it's responsible for roughly 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. What we found really interesting was that there's a lot already happening in operational carbon, reducing heating, electricity, cooling in buildings, which makes sense because then you also make it more economically viable. But there hasn't been happening so much on the embodied carbon side of things. So all things, materials and building materials before the building becomes even operational. That was the very broad topic that we said, oh, this looks interesting. And we thought there would also be a business case. Building materials alone account for roughly 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Just looking at how much we build, we're adding the building mass of a New York City to our global building stock every month, and we're going to double our global building stock until 2060. So there's actually still a lot being built while we're not building sustainably at all. We thought for sure there will be some change. Then we went in actually super broad and just talked to a lot of people along the value chain that are involved in construction to find a specific problem.
Thank you. That's great. And I think that when I'm thinking about how sustainability is taught in universities or how it's talked about, there are often other sectors that are being put into the front. So aviation is talked about a lot, transportation is talked about a lot, maybe some heavy industry, but the building sector is for sure still underestimated by a lot of people. So it's great that you're focusing there. Turning to your journey from when you had the idea and when you started out, can you maybe talk about some challenges that you had to overcome? I'm sure there were some obstacles finding the right product market fit, etc. And maybe are there any obstacles that were different because you were in the climate space than if you had just founded any other startup?
Yes, all the challenges, I guess. But the one that comes to mind whenever I think about what was really the most challenging time in our founding phase, and it has been only been 2.5 years, right? So there's a lot to come still. But what was really challenging was in the very beginning when we didn't have this product market fit and we just started out in the space. So as I said, like top down, bottom up, we both had a little bit of a relation to construction. So we've worked there before, and my co-founder grew up in a family that had a construction business for the past 100 years. It's actually exactly 100 this year. So he has some history there. I also did a project in the construction space previously. And we looked into this space and we thought, okay, there must be something, but we didn't really have a specific target group or knew where to start. So we started our conversations very much focused on the architects and project developers that are involved in the early planning phases of a building. And we assumed, well, this is where you can most influence the impact because you can still choose, am I building out of concrete? Am I building out of wood? So this is where you have the really, really big levers. However, when we built a small MVP for them and tried it out, there was not much interest. They found it cool, but there was no urgency and no willingness to pay. So pretty soon we shifted to another pitch and we said, okay, we just aggregate all the building material data and make it available via API. So we were essentially building a solution for software products in the construction space. Problem, that was when we first felt a bit of a pull, but again, the willingness to pay was dependent on the end customer who wanted to pay for this add-on CO2 module, as they called it. And then we realized kind of by coincidence that actually this data source that we assumed to be there already is not complete at all. There's a lot of building material data still missing. And that was when we did this last shift. So to bring it back to the challenge, this time was just really, really intense emotionally because we didn't have any income from customers. We didn't have funding at that point. So we were living from our own funds. And coming back from the US, I was broke, very broke. Then it is just like, there was this point in time when my co-founder said, well, you should take a break this weekend. And I said, I don't see how I can take a break because I don't know how to pay my rent in June. And that was June 23. So it was just like, because I was responsible for sales and fundraising at the same time, it was this time where like nothing was enough, like nothing that I could put in would be enough. And that was really,
That sounds like a lot. And it also sounds like it was not an easy and straightforward journey from idea to understanding where the sector really wants to put the money.
Yeah, also adding on your question of how is it different for the climate space, I found it really frustrating that where the biggest lever was with architects and project developers, we still couldn't push something into the market that was not requested yet. You still need to solve a specific problem. And even if you know high level, it is a huge problem. If the specific target group doesn't have a problem at hand, then there's nothing you can do really.
Is it in the end very connected to regulations and the EPDs that they have to issue, right? So is regulation a big part of it?
Yes and no. So our customers surprisingly get the pressure from their customers, not from regulation at all. It's more the architects and project developers requesting this data. So it was a surprising insight that the ones who make this decision don't really have like a need for a product, but they put pressure on a target group that does have a need for a digital product, and that was the manufacturers. So this insight was really a game changer, and that pressure is still created either by just the demand. So often investors can sell their buildings more expensively if they have a sustainability certificate. So it's more of a voluntary thing. Sometimes they also get national financial support, like they get cheaper loans, for example, and then it again pays off financially. And then in Europe, especially, some countries already put upper limits for their buildings. So for example, in the UK and the Netherlands, for a building of a specific square meter size, you will have an upper limit for CO2 emissions, and then you need to show where your building is actually, in which benchmark the building falls. And that then leads to architects and project developers requesting this data from manufacturers. Now, for the first time, the manufacturers are being regulated, and this just happened super recently. So we're now starting to slowly also feel the pressure at the manufacturers, the regulatory pressure, but that was not what we started out with.
Thank you, Lisa. This is a fascinating story that we're hearing, especially being in 2025. It sounds like all of these aspects are pretty much just emerging. So I'm really excited to see where you take this accelerated momentum. Could you tell us a little more about how you balance profitability and climate impact? We know it's quite challenging, especially in the climate space, and a lot of companies choose to go the nonprofit route to focus on the impact space. How are you tackling that?
Yeah. My first intuition was there is no balancing, because the argument always goes, we need a planet to even survive or even keep our economic system viable as it is today. So there is no balancing. It just goes hand in hand and nothing else. Our conviction has always been that eventually it will pay off to follow more sustainable practices, also as building material manufacturers, a big polluter, if you want to say it like this. However, the market reality today, of course, is not always there. And we do have situations where, for example, our customers to be say things like, oh, but what if we calculate it in a bit of a different way, and then beautify results, essentially. And this is where we pretty clearly in the beginning defined our values, where we will never put the customer over the environment. So this was a very, I would say, tough choice, as a startup, your only exercise or your only task is to make your customers happy. Well, not even as a startup, as any company in the world, really. But then putting the environment above customers is just coming from this conviction that eventually they will benefit from this as well. And especially in our market, reputation is just super important. So we cannot afford to calculate or like make nicer looking calculations, and they also won't benefit from it in the long run. But this, yes, has led to some, like, losing some customers. On the other hand, the customer group that we really want on board, they're extremely excited about this approach. They say they already come with the conviction, okay, we need to change something. They come in and say, I also want to use this data to then improve my products. I want to use this data and show it to my customers. And this is the kind of niche target group that we want today. And our conviction is just that this niche will expand hugely, but it's a nice place to be in, because the niche for us is already big enough to build a viable business. And I know that in many other climate sectors or climate focused businesses, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, I think a strong ethical principle is crucial in this line of work. So thank you for leading by example. Could you talk a little more about what kind of impact you're seeing within your customers? Once they implement your software, is it translating into direct revenue? Is it directing into cost reduction? Could you give a little more color there?
Yeah. I mean, the reason why customers work with us is because we reduce time and cost for them to do the product level accounting. So this is the very obvious reason for them why they go with us. Previously, they mostly worked with consultancies or with more expert focused tools. However, this took a long time. Then verification of this data was an extra step that again took money and time. And then publication of this data was yet an extra step. Now, what we did was we built a platform that is really easy to use also for non-lifecycle assessment experts, so non-LCA experts, we say, people who understand the product and the processes really well, but who are not necessarily focused on LCA or have a big education there. And then for them, it's essentially just feeding data in, outputting verified data. And that changes their process from roughly a year to get one product declaration to a week. So
Wow.
it's really a big game changer for them. It's the first time that they can scale this. So we always say EPDs at scale, meaning that they can do this for all their products because we do not charge by product. We just charge a standard software license, and then they can model all their products. And the immediate impact that we see for the customers is usually it's just cheaper and faster. But then the next step, the moment they do this, is also most of the time, oh, interesting. Here I have a really big, for example, raw material impact that I can easily exchange because I actually don't necessarily need this raw material, or I can choose another supplier. So it really also then leads to understanding where they can change something. And many of our customers also say, well, I know that regulation will force me to publish this data in 2-3 years. So I need this time frame now to improve my products and then be able to compete based on better environmental performance before and have this time frame to reduce before I need to publish it anyways. So yeah, we do see the data being used to also improve.
That's amazing. It also means they're probably securing those alternative supply chains ahead of everybody else coming in. So, in terms
Exactly.
of long term investment, that's a very smart move to make. Pivoting slightly from customer impact to your impact as a company, how do you measure success and what is important in terms of achieving KPIs or other milestones?
Yeah. So from the beginning, our goal has always been to reduce 100 million tons of CO2 until 2030. That was what we started out with. However, going the startup route, because that was what we started out with, and we saw that VC funding and going this high speed, high scale way is the best way to achieve this and achieve this first. So we said, okay, we're going this route. And the moment you get in VC money, the goal is also building a $1 billion company at least. So we kind of followed both goals. And the reason why I think this works is because they don't contradict each other. So more customers lead to more revenue, also lead to a bigger climate impact because we help more products being decarbonized. So this is great. And I always believed in this triple bottom line methodology that Mohammed Yunus first introduced. It doesn't need to contradict each other. It's challenging usually, but social, environmental, and economic benefits can go along with each other. And that is very much the track that we're on to.
Absolutely. You talked about a very scientific, I would say, way you approach getting into the climate space. And you had this really nice build up from student projects to experimenting in a few sectors. If you were starting over, how would you advise folks approach getting into the climate space?
I think what has been, and I mean, this is startup Bible now, but I'll just repeat what I learned and it helped me a lot, is to not lose focus. So especially in climate, but in any area really, you can really lose focus because there's so many problems to solve. It's like my conviction is that in any industry, on any problem, you can have a large impact, and to not lose yourself in these thoughts of, ooh, is this still large enough? Like we even had this thought in the beginning. It's very obvious, right? Reducing building material impacts has a big lever. And still we were thinking, but if we completely drop architects and project developers, is that still big enough? Because they kind of make the material choice. And I mean, there are things that you can only figure out from a political standpoint. There are things that you might only be able to figure out if you're an established player, and you just need to find something where you can solve a true problem that a real customer has, and not lose yourself in idealism, because that is just how our economic system works, or how capitalism works really. So one advice, just focus, 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 and drill deeper into a space rather than staying on the surface and not solving anything really.
Yeah, it sounds like identifying a big, impactful area is critical as a starting point, right? And then drilling deeper and following some of the footsteps you have been on, interviewing stakeholders, understanding what is the actual problem they have, rather than starting with a problem that might be real or imaginary and starting to build without actually doing the analysis first.
Yeah, and you can have really philosophical discussions on a high level, right? You can discuss what is more important, climate or human health. And these kind of discussions, in my opinion, they're interesting, but they have nothing to do with building a startup. If you want a company that works well, then you need to go very, very, very deep and start in a super tiny niche. But if you make your first 10 customers really happy, they're willing to pay, and you have the conviction that this tiny little customer group is either able to expand very fast, or there are other customer groups around this which you can easily serve with your product, then you have something there.
Yeah, yeah. Golden advice. What would you say are some of the resources, tools, and networks that helped you when you were just starting out, or that you are aware of a little bit later down in the journey that you would recommend to others?
Yeah, so it has definitely helped reading a lot on this topic, and some of the standard advices are 0 to 1 or lean startup. There's also a book called Discipline Entrepreneurship, which gives a really step-by-step guide of how starting a company works. And these kind of things helped actually, because you just know how a good blueprint looks like. And also, for example, YC has their, I think it's like 10 or 15 advices to follow. And if you actually take them seriously and try to understand what's behind them, then in my opinion, they can be hugely helpful, because just listening to this over and over again will remind you while doing a startup or while building a company, that it's important to not lose focus, to not get annoyed by your co-founders, to like, there's some things in there that are just important to follow. And this has helped a lot. But then also just working myself into the entrepreneurship and startup scene, because I started out knowing that I wanted to found a company at some point, and then I started building network. So it was not as if I just like came out and had worked in 5 startups and then I thought, now I want to found a company. This has always been the goal. And then I did CDTM, for example, where a lot of founders come out of it. I joined startups and also venture capital firm to learn the tools of building startups. And this has definitely been helpful. One, by being able to ask other founders for advice, especially in the early phases, invaluable, really, really, really helpful. And two, seeing how other startups do it and knowing, oh, I can just take over this blueprint, or I really don't think this is great how they did it, so I do it another way. So yeah, I would say if you want to found, just go and expose yourself to other startups and to networks where other founders are around.
Yeah, what you're saying is so important because oftentimes people feel that they need to do everything from scratch, but probably 60 to 70% of what you need, the scaffolding is already there. And then you just need to differentiate on top without reinventing the wheel. So,
Yeah.
absolutely, very, very important. What would be your next challenge for Emidat? What are you guys excited about? And what are you excited about in the climate space in general?
Yeah. So maybe also like adding on to what you just said, I think it was a VC just recently gave me this mental model, which I think fits quite well, that in the early phases, like pre-seed seed, it's super helpful to have other startups to ask for advice, because there's so many things that you can adopt from each other. Then in the middle phase, like series A, B, and around that time where you go deeper into your customer base, other startups don't help as much, because your task is to get deeper into your space and really understand a customer problem and solve that problem with your product. And then eventually in a later stage, when it goes to IPO and I don't know, exiting a company, whatever, it's again helpful to get advice from others. And I would say we're somewhere in the middle now. So we're approaching this phase where advice from other startups is not as helpful anymore. Biggest challenges for us right now is building a really high performing team that can serve our customers. And product market fit is also a not super clean definition, but we do feel that there is a lot more demand than we can currently serve. And now it's really about operationalizing this and leading the customers through the journey, and then onboarding them and then bringing them onto the product. Because for us, it's also, LCA in itself is quite a science. And for us, we started with specific building products, and we now have like 15, 16 different ones onboarded on the platform. But usually whenever we get a new customer in a new category, we need to be pretty fast to onboard a new product group. And this on the product side keeps being a challenge. And I would say this is what we do for the next 1.5 years. And then eventually we can start thinking about, okay, now we have this material level data built out. What do we do with this data on top now? So there are things that you could do, like, for example, enabling the manufacturer to then share this data with their customers and build some simple interface for an architect or for a project developer to compile different products for their project and actually do building level assessments. So there's a lot that we can still do in the future.
Yeah, LCA is a whole PhD on its own. I
Yeah.
briefly touched on it in my master's, and yes, it was not
Yeah.
easy at all. So you are doing a big, big piece of work. So it sounds like you're hiring, or are you
Yes.
trying to optimize the operational level things, or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both.
Is it challenging to find talent? And how are you integrating AI agents and some of the tech that's coming out into your business?
Yeah, great question. Love it. So I would say no, not at this stage. We have had more talent than we could take in, really. So that's a good problem to have. And Munich has also become a really interesting international startup hub. So yeah, it's not just Berlin anymore or London. People start seeing it and also coming in from outside. And then there's also great universities here and also great companies that are now a little bit ahead of us where we can then hire from if people get bored with operations and want to start building again. So this is really cool. I don't really see a problem there. With AI agents, actually, we have obviously used it in software development. I think this is pretty standard by now. But we're looking a bit deeper into how we can use it also in sales and on the commercial side, because we're at this point, it's also pretty natural startup involvement where at some point commercial team takes over product tech team in terms of headcount. And we were about to reach this point. So we're now roughly half. And so the obvious question is, how can we make commercial processes easier, maybe also with AI agents? And with outreach messages, this has been super helpful. Also with sourcing leads, insane tools out there that we're using. But what still isn't easy to automate is calling them or meeting them at conferences. Just for this customer size and for our ticket size, this is still a crucial point in our sales and customer journey. So we cannot really get rid of it right now, meaning that if we continue like this, we will need to add people to help our customers and to onboard our customers. And this is, I think, where the next journey for AI agents will go.
Yeah, agreed. And a lot is happening so quickly. So I think even a week or 2 weeks from now, we're going to see a whole new wave of products that might
For
be
sure.
solving what you just mentioned. What is the best way for listeners to connect with you and learn more about the work that Emidat is doing?
I look on LinkedIn. So easiest is sending a contact request with a message. And then if it's precise or a question that I can answer, very, very happy to connect there.
Super. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'll pass it on to Victoria.
Lisa, thank you so much. This has been a great half hour. We learned a lot about the construction sector, about how to find a topic in climate to work on, and about your journey. And it's really amazing to see how Emidat is growing and how you make the construction sector cool and how you're attracting talent. So it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time.